Cool. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is the Tuesday, July 27th virtual users group for Backdrop. The plan today is to cover automated testing. Specifically, I think the plan was to go over simple test, but we could cover other things if people want to talk about that as well. Do we want to have everyone introduce themselves?
It's usually a good idea. It's weird circumstances today.
Okay.
But I'll go ahead and introduce myself quick since I'm talking. I'm Tim. I'm in Deerwood, Minnesota. I was supposed to host this meeting today, but my power died, so I'm coming to you on my phone. Yeah, and good luck. And because you're probably going to lose me as soon as my phone runs out of power, I'm going to be gone. So, anyways, go ahead.
All right, thanks. I'm Joseph Latt. I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I volunteered to host this meeting because I've done a bunch of stuff with the simple test framework in Backdrop, although I would not consider myself by any means an expert on the subject. Luke, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Luke McCormick. I'm a one-time programmer, occasionally product manager and project manager and other kinds of things like that in San Ramon, California. I've never written any tests, and I really should. So that's why I'm here, to try to level up there. How about Peter?
Peter, BW Panda in Australia, and I'm interested in tests because I'm often writing code or contributing like pull requests and stuff, and then they need tests written, but I've not done it before and it's a bit confusing, so I'm interested to learn more so I can contribute more. And Robert.
You're muted, Robert.
Thanks. I'm Robert Lang, bug folder on the internet. It sounds like I'm in a similar boat as some of the others. I've done a little bit of tinkering with simple test because some of the modules I ported had tests in Drupal and needed work to get them running in Backdrop. It was a little painful, so I'm hoping to pick up some tips and techniques and knowledge here that'll make that process a little less painful for future development.
All right, so I can start with screen share and maybe. Okay, this might look a little weird because the only option it has is to share a window or share my entire screen. So I'm just going to go with entire screen. All right. So I have a brand new site here. So in order to run simple test, you first have to go into functionality, and there is a module called testing that you have to enable. And then once you have done that, under development, there will be this testing link, and you can go here to see all of the tests that are provided by any modules you have installed, or by any profiles you have installed. And so this is basically a stock Backdrop site. So all of these tests are provided by Backdrop, and they essentially are what we run on every time someone makes a pull request to Backdrop. These tests get automatically run to determine if the code breaks anything that was an existing feature in Backdrop. So each of these groups can potentially have a bunch of tests under them. And so these are basically, these are integration tests. So they're not like unit tests like PHP unit, which test only a single function or a single class or something like that. These test the entire backdrop infrastructure as a complete unit, and because of that, they have to set up a database whenever their tests are run. So sometimes they are a bit slow, but they do allow you to test code that has database queries or things like that in it. I have made a small module. It's very simple. So you need 2 files essentially at a minimum to be able to have tests show up. You need to have a file that contains your tests, and you can call it whatever you want. But in this case, I named it my test module.test, and then you have a .tests.info file. So this will be your info file, and this is where this is what Backdrop looks at to find your tests. So you'll have this, which is the name of your class, and then you'll have a human readable name and a description, and then you'll have a group, which is these group categories here, and then you'll have the file that it's in. And so this information here is in Drupal 7 used to be in a function in your test class, but now it's in an info file.
Hey, Joseph. I've got this expanded as big as possible on my screen, and the text is really tiny. Is there any way you can bump up the font size a little bit?
Maybe.
Okay. Can anybody else read that?
Yeah, it's a bit small for me too.
How's that?
Much better.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, so this information would in Drupal 7 have been in a function in your test, and for Backdrop, when you're converting your tests, one of the first things you have to do is move this out of that info function and into this dedicated info file. Once you've done this, so then you need to actually build the classes. So each class, as a PHP class, will show up as its own entry here. And so in this case, and there are basically 2 functions at a minimum that you need. One is your setup function, which you actually, if you don't need to do anything, you can exclude it and it'll just run your parent's setup function. But if you want to enable modules before it runs your test, or if you want to change a setting before the test run, then you would do that here in your setup function. And then you would need a function in your class that starts with the word test. So when it runs, it'll get your class and look for every method that has the word test at the start, and it'll run all of them. And before each function, it will reset up your backdrop environment and rerun this setup function. In this case, it's just a very simple test where it's checking that 2 variables are equal. So I'm going to just run this real quick. Oh, and of course there's an error. I'm going to run clean environment just to make sure that there aren't like old files on my computer that are messing with it. Okay, this is what it's supposed to do. So we can see it tells you how long it took to run the batch of tests you selected, and it'll give you information about it, and then we can open this up and see Each error or debug message or each test assertion will have its own line in here. And so the assertions are basically these assert equal or assert not equal in this case. There are two classes that Backdrop provides that you can extend to build your classes. One is this Backdrop web test case, which will do a full install of Backdrop and provide you with a clean environment for every test function that it runs. And then there's Backdrop unit test case, which actually skips the whole database process. So it's much faster, but if your code depends on a database query at any point, this will throw errors. So we can return to the list, and I can run my unit test, and this will be a lot faster. It was almost instant. So if you don't need the database available, it's recommended to do this because it will be significantly faster. These two classes provide a lot of functions to help you with checking the values. So they have asserts, which you put a true false value, assert equal, which you give two values and it'll check, assert false, which is essentially the opposite of assert. So this will check for a true value and this will check for a false value. And so it has a lot of built-in functions to test whether or not something has successfully happened. And anytime you call any of those assert functions, it will have a message that prints out to the screen. We could change this to B. Oh, I always go to the wrong one. Return to list. So this should now fail. Yep. So it gives you a red message. It says that there was one failure. So that is essentially what it looks like when your assertions don't pass.
Can I just say something about that?
Yep.
To go back to the error message. This is something I always struggled with initially with tests, and I'm more used to it now, but initially I was very confused, like when you're running, like doing a pull request or something, and you're seeing these messages not in maybe a Backdrop site, but on the GitHub or something, and you see fail value A is equal to value B. It's like, well, no, it's not. They're different. But the message is saying what should happen.
Right. Yes, the message says what should happen, not what actually happened.
Yeah, so with failures, it's always the opposite, which is always confusing me, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so with the, let me bring that list up again. So with, there's this optional message that you can provide a message if it's weird or unclear, but in most cases that's not provided, and it just has a default message that is just what it expected to happen and not what actually happened. In a few cases, they're like where the tests are really complicated, they have actually useful messages. But yeah, you're right. There are a lot of places where it's counterintuitive, like what you're looking for. One thing that's very helpful when you're writing tests is that there is a debug function. And this works pretty much everywhere in Backdrop. So you just put debug like anywhere in the whole site. And when you run your tests, if it passes by one of those lines, it'll show up as a line here. So I can rerun this and, oh, it didn't do it. Oh, well, that's not supposed to happen. Oh, apparently it doesn't show them if the tests all pass. Anyway, so yeah, so these will be, you can print pretty much anything you want out. Some other helpful functions that it provides are their functions for creating users. Where is it? I'm sure they were in here. Oh, they all start with backdrop. That's right. Backdrop. So you call this, which is functions from your backdrop web test case, and backdrop, and then create content type, nodes, roles, users, pretty much everything that you could create has an option in here. You can also get pages and get forms and then post those forms back. You can simulate AJAX requests using these things, which those are actually really complicated, and I'm not 100% sure how that works. So this is basically your bare minimum of what you need to get a test to show up in the interface and run. And now I can go take a look. I can go show some other tests. Actually, this one probably is better. Oh yeah, random name is used like all over the place, and it literally just returns, I think it's an 8-character string. So common is a lot of unit tests, but they also they have functions where they'll get CSS files, like try to load them as if it was a web browser and check for content. It's really hard to see everything with this zoomed in so much. Here, it's using, so one of the things that is kind of unintuitive sometimes that you'll often want to test is testing for basically errors on a form. And there's 2 ways to get those. You can do the backdrop HTTP request, like what it's showing here, but you can also do this. Backdrop get and a path. And this will allow you to basically load up a page, and then you can do, actually, what's the return value? Oh yeah, this gets the actual HTML of the page. But if there's a form on that page, you can create an array of values that you want it to modify on the form, and then do this. Oops, it's not working because I forgot that. Backdrop post, and you can post the form. So you can do this to get the form the first time, and then you can create an edit array with this. You'd use the same path for the form, and then you'd use the edit, which is basically all the names. It'll be the name property of a field, and then the value that you want the field to be in your array, and then your submit is the name of the button you want it to click. And that will be able to submit a form. Let's actually do that. Actually, I think I can node.test. I think there's actually an example here. It's kind of hard to see everything with all of this zoomed way in. Oh, here we go. Here is the test in the node module that tests the edit page. And so here's the example where it creates this array where it actually randomly generates the some things sometimes, so it'll dynamically generate these edit values sometimes. But here it's just title and then the body. And it's setting 2 values, and then it's doing the post, this backdrop post, and it's the node add page, the edit value, the edit array, and then save, which is just the name of the button. And then you can get backdrop get node by title to return it, and then it checks that there is something there. And then here it has a click link edit. So what it does is every time you do a backdrop get or a backdrop post or anything that simulates loading a page, it'll store that page in a variable. And then you can use this click link to just click anything on the page. Like, so if you know it's there, you just click link and the name of the link, and it'll just do it and load a new page and put that new page in that variable. And more of these helper functions to assert different things. I think this one is actually, oh no, it's part of the normal one. Some of the classes also provide their own assertion functions. This is really common, especially in the taxonomy stuff and in the views tests. So they'll set up their own base classes with their own assertion functions. Assert field by Xpather. And so here in the assert function, so you can actually build your own extensions on this, but it essentially goes back to here and it just checks the value and then stores, it creates this array and then stores it in the database. So you can make assertions that have different data and store them, although you do have to have all the fields, otherwise you'll get PDO errors from the database. But yeah, you can actually put whatever you want into this database table, and whatever you put in there will get displayed here as new lines. And it's just as long as you have all the fields filled in, it should work. As an example, I'm actually putting into that table the amount of time it takes for each thing. So when you run a group of tests, I don't know how long this is going to take. Here, it has the time for each test function, and that's actually stored in that table. And then at the end, it all gets pulled out and aggregated and printed here. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Yes.
All right.
So with a function, so we go back to code and it's one of those test functions.
Mhm.
Okay, it's a function testing things. Each function, is that a discrete thing that doesn't rely on anything else other than like the setup or the parent? Like you can't reference things between different functions.
Right. So each time, for
Can I
every
interrupt
function.
briefly?
Oh, sure.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. The last person was speaking. Sorry, couldn't hear it very clearly.
So I believe Peter's question was if you have multiple test functions in the same class, that they're discrete from each other and don't have information passed between them.
Yep.
Yes. So yes. So that is the case. So if I took this and test some more things. So it would essentially set up an environment, run your setup function, and then run this. And then once this function was done running, it would tear down the environment and set up a new environment and run your setup again, and then run this function. So it does a clean install of backdrop between each function in each test class. So we could do here, actually I'm going to remove these because those will probably throw more errors. And so it'll show up as just one row when you're running the tests, but it'll have the two assertions. And hopefully this is working. Run tests. All right. Here, so this is basically XHProf, like a user interface on it. So we can see here that the setup function was run twice. And that was because we now have two test functions in this class. So yeah, it basically does a complete well, it doesn't do a complete install of backdrop. We have this thing here which caches the installation profiles, so it'll install each profile once and then reuse it. But if we disabled this, then yes, for every single function, it would do a complete install of backdrop.
So if you had things that needed to rely on other things, for example, you want to create a user and then test editing the user, deleting the user, stuff like that, you'd either create the user in the setup function, or you'd just have one function that did all those things one after the other.
Right. Yes. So you would have to create the user as part of the setup and then have each test do one of the various things, or run them all together. I would probably run them all together because it'd be a lot faster. But there are some cases where you don't want that to happen, especially if you. Would be an example. I think they do that a lot in views. Like they'll set up. There's a test for almost every single setting in the views UI, and for a lot of those tests, they don't want it. They affect the output of the HTML on the page, and they don't want one test's settings to interfere with another test settings. And so if you go through these, there's actually a couple hundred, I think, test functions and views. Actually, one example of that annoys me a lot is common. Is it this one? Might be this one. There's a CSS test and then a JavaScript test, which essentially do a full installation of Backdrop, test and then have a test function for each of the various ways of adding a CSS file to the page. So this is a 20-second test that essentially just puts a CSS file on a page because it's reinstalling Backdrop like I think it's 10 times. So yeah. I've actually been doing some testing. I've talked about this in development meetings in the past, but about 90% of our test execution time is actually setting up, just doing that database setup process. Did anyone else have any questions or comments? All right. Does anyone have anything they want me to show off with this?
Could you say a few words about Xpath and the facility for finding stuff, whether something appears on a web page and
You mean this?
yeah.
Or...
This is just something I've run across lately, and it's a little bit mysterious.
I actually have not had to do a lot with Xpath, so I do not really know how these work.
Okay.
Yeah. Does anyone else have experience with this?
Yeah, maybe I could help a bit there. So
Right.
I don't know the technical description for Xpath, but essentially, if you do an Xpath assertion, it actually tries to match actual page strings as opposed to doing any sort of PHP operation. So, for example, I'm chewing gum at the same time. I have an extension for Chrome called Xpather that I use to, maybe that's quite useful when you're trying to write Xpath tests. Maybe you can try that. So, for example, if you want to test to see if a particular string appears on a page, say, for example, you want to see if the expression, the content type has been created, for example. You could do an XPath expression that will find that particular string. But if you wanted to find the actual HTML, you can write an XPath expression that finds not just the words in that string, but if it's wrapped, for example, in a bold, or if it's wrapped in div, you can write an XPath that will look in the page, search through the page, and find a particular set of string expressions. I don't know if string is the right word that I should use, but essentially, if you want to find any sort of HTML on a page, the XPath will be able to look through the page HTML and actually find that. Probably not explaining it quite well, but that's essentially what it does. I wish I had access that I could show you what it means, but don't have that.
Oops. Hopefully this page still exists. ABC. So is this a regular expression, or is this based on regular expressions, or is this like Oh. ABC.
Yeah, it's not really based on regular expressions. I don't think it is. It has its XPath seems to have its own sort of language that it uses to find expressions on the page or find elements on the page, I should say.
ABC, ABC, AB, ADC. So in this first one, it's looking for ABC in this HTML code. So it's essentially searching for the HTML tags. That's interesting.
So searching for HTML structure, I guess.
Okay.
I didn't realize that was something built into PHP. I thought it was something unique to the testing. So.
Yeah, so you can
Learn
actually
something
build
new.
an XPath expression that says find an element, a div, for example, with this particular class, and check to see if there is another div with that particular class within it, and check to see if there's a text with this particular string within that. So it can be quite complex, and you can search for different elements within different elements. It can be quite. You can search quite deep within the HTML.
It's kind of a jQuery for PHP.
Or more like it. Maybe, yeah.
I suppose the best way to express it is probably sort of like regular expressions, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never actually had to do much with these. Book price dot arrow.
I encountered it in the existing tests for a module being ported, so I was wondering about that.
So I was just looking at just to find an example. For example, on node.test, for example, there's an XPath query that says find an A tag which contains a reference to the page test view feed if there's an image within that contains a source feed.png. So it can be you can drill down quite deeply into and find a particular set of string that gives you a particular result. I find that sometimes you actually have to
makes a lot more sense now.
Sorry, you guys were talking over each other.
Sorry. No, I just think with that explanation, the line you're scrolling through now makes a lot more sense. It's of what's going on in it.
Right, it's looking for the class block node recent, and then checking that inside there's a div with a table.
Yeah.
Body tr, and then it's checking that it's the first row, and then checking the actual, and then checking the text of the value.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. So this would be if you need to verify that something in a template is rendering your HTML properly, I guess.
Yeah, that's essentially it. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, there are a lot of other tests where they just check that the text is anywhere on the page, especially if they're testing for like error messages. Yeah, interesting.
So, Joseph, I've got a question about all the different, like assert this, assert that, or backdrop, all the different are they called functions? What are they called? I'm not that great with object-oriented code. Your editor brings up the list of all of them as you're typing, but for those of us that don't have that, can you show us where we would find out what options there are to use for different things?
Sure. So if you go to core, can you guys see this? I don't know. This might be small.
Small, yeah.
Let me try increasing the font size in that. This is an editor called NetBeans. It's kind of old. It's like a Java editor. It's not actually designed for PHP, so it has some weird quirks. Anyway, I'll just say, if you go into core modules and then simple test, there is a PHP file here called backdropwebtestcase.php, and that is where those two classes that you can extend live. And if you go, oh, it's already open. And so all of those functions live in this class here, or most of them. So this test case one has a lot of those helper functions, checking your requirements. So like it depends on curl, so it'll do that. And it also contains the stuff for actually setting up the database prefixes. Where's it? So yeah, so that'd be just down here. Insert assert, delete assert, various things. Oh, these ones are actually really useful to know about. You can use your insert assert and your delete assert. These are basically helper functions to put stuff into that table that stores all of the log messages that get printed out for your test. And yeah, so you don't have to write your own database query stuff to put stuff into that table. You can just, if you need something to be printed out, you call this function and put it in there. Yeah, here we go. Assert true, assert false, null, whatever. So these are all in here, basically. And it's important to note that these are all protected, which means you can't call them from outside of your test class. So yeah. Anything else anyone wants to talk about? All right.
I'd just like to say that I think the best way to figure this out really is to just write some tests. Even if you have a small custom module, it's useful to write tests. I imagine we might have discussed that. But you can figure out how to do it by just trying to do it. And it actually works out quite simple. Once you get the hang of the backdrop get and the backdrop posts, then the rest of it becomes quite reasonable and understandable after that. But I would encourage them, even if you have a simple, well, maybe not simple, but if you have a custom module or any module at all, I think it's useful to have tests, just to make sure everything works, especially when you want things to work with multiple users, multiple permissions, rather than having to sign out and sign back in as a different user. You could just write a test and give different users different permissions and change things, submit the form 1,000 times, 2,000 times to see what happens. I think that's the most useful thing about the testing framework for me.
Right. Yeah. you can run through a lot of manual things really quickly. Yeah, actually, that's the ability to log in and log out is actually super useful. So you can do backdrop login with an account or log out. And this create user. So yeah, you can do that. You create a user, log in as that user, log out, and you can assign different roles to them or permissions. If you need a specific permission to be assigned to a user, you can just put the names of all those permissions in here, and it'll automatically create a role for you that has all those permissions and assign it to your user. So that's actually really helpful. And yeah, like Doc said, most of what I've learned from about tests has been from just porting modules that have tests, or from work I've done to try and make the test framework better. I just kind of figured it out. I don't know. There's not really any easy way to figure all this stuff out.
And just one last thing. I mean, I don't know if you I missed the first 20 minutes, but I don't know if you discussed it. But the way I think about writing the tests is just imagine that you are browsing the website yourself, and you're going from page to page and submitting forms. That's essentially what tests look like to me. So backdrop get means go to this path. Backdrop post means submit this form, and that's it. So if you have a website and you want to know how it works, I mean, you have write a module and you want to make sure that it's working the way that it's supposed to. You just imagine that this is the page that my module provides. You backdrop get to that page, you post some data into the form, click the button, and just assert that whatever is supposed to be on the page after you click the button is on the page with all the assert functions. That's simply that's simply what the tests are.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any comments or anything they want to talk about? I'm pretty much done at this point. I've kind of covered all the things that I know about.
I just want to say thank you for Joseph for not only doing this for us to help us learn more about it, but also all the work you've done in core of trying to get tests more performant and running better and stuff like that. So that's really appreciated.
Yeah, it's a big hurdle at the moment. Just the amount of time it takes to actually run them. Because at this point, it's basically impossible to run the full test suite on your local machine because it takes like an hour or more. So yeah. Oh, and sorry. All right. Well, I think if no one else has anything else they want to add, I guess we're done.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.